Imagine a place on our planet, a small corner of the world, where the story of human civilization is written into the very soil. This is Syria. Long before the great pyramids of Egypt pierced the sky, long before the philosophers of Greece pondered the cosmos, people here were building cities, writing laws, and gazing at the same stars we see today. We call this region the Fertile Crescent, an arc of rich land that became a nursery for human society. Syria sits at the very heart of this ancient world, a crossroads where ideas, goods, and entire armies have marched for thousands of years. It's a land that has witnessed the birth and death of countless empires, each leaving behind a layer of its story for us to uncover. To understand Syria is to take a journey back in time, deep into the dawn of what we call history. Here, in places like Ebla and Mari, humanity took some of its first giant leaps. The people of Ebla, for instance, created one of the world's earliest known archives. They etched their records onto clay tablets, giving us a stunningly clear window into their lives nearly 4,500 years ago. These weren't just king lists or battle reports, they were records of trade, of administration, of everyday life in a bustling metropolis. Meanwhile, along the coast, the city of Ugarit gave us one of the greatest gifts to communication, one of the first alphabets. This simple system of symbols, representing sounds instead of whole ideas, would eventually evolve and spread across the globe, becoming the ancestor of the very letters you are reading now. The land was too rich, too strategically important, to be left alone for long. It became a prize for the ancient world's first superpowers. The Akkadians, led by Sargon the Great, swept in from Mesopotamia, forging one of history's first empires, and uniting vast territories under a single ruler. After them came the Babylonians, who brought with them their famous legal codes, and then the mighty Assyrians, whose military innovations made them the terror of the Near East. Each conquest brought destruction, but it also brought new ideas, new technologies, and new people. This constant churn of cultures is what made Syria so dynamic, a melting pot where different traditions blended to create something entirely new and unique. This cycle of conquest and cultural fusion continued for centuries. The Hittites came down from Anatolia, the Egyptians pushed up from the south, and finally, the vast Persian Empire swallowed the entire region. The Persians were master administrators, connecting their immense territory with roads and a standardized system of governance. For Syria, this meant being part of a stable, prosperous network that stretched from India to Greece. The land served as a vital link in the royal road, a highway for trade and communication that pulsed with life. Caravans carrying spices, textiles, and precious metals plodded through its cities, making them wealthy and cosmopolitan centers of the ancient world. This was Syria's destiny, to be the bridge between East and West. The world changed forever with the arrival of a young, ambitious king from Macedonia. His name was Alexander the Great. In a whirlwind campaign of astonishing speed and brilliance, he shattered the Persian Empire and brought the banner of Greek culture, or Hellenism, to the ancient East. Syria, once a Persian province, now found itself at the center of a new, Greek-speaking world. After Alexander's early death, his vast empire was carved up by his generals. One of them, Seleucus, claimed Syria and the East, founding the Seleucid Empire and a new capital, Antioch, which would become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. This was a time of profound transformation, as Greek art, philosophy, and science mingled with the region's ancient traditions. The Seleucid kings ruled for a time, but a new power was rising in the west, a power of unparalleled organization and military might: Rome. In 64 BC, the Roman general Pompey the Great marched his legions into Syria, annexing it as a Roman province. For the next 7 centuries, Syria would be a cornerstone of the Roman and later, the Byzantine Empire. The Romans were builders and engineers, and their legacy is still visible across the Syrian landscape. They constructed roads, aqueducts, theaters, and temples, tying the province ever more tightly into the Mediterranean world. Cities like Palmyra, the bride of the desert, flourished as crucial hubs on the trade routes linking Rome with Persia, India, and China. Palmyra's story is a universe unto itself. It was an oasis city that grew fabulously wealthy by controlling the caravan trade. Its people spoke Aramaic, worshipped a blend of local and Greco-Roman gods, and built a city of breathtaking beauty. For a brief, glorious moment in the 3rd century AD, under the leadership of its brilliant and ambitious Queen Zenobia, Palmyra broke away from Rome and forged its own empire, stretching from Egypt to Turkey. It was a bold challenge to Roman authority, a testament to the region's enduring spirit of independence. Though Zenobia was eventually defeated and her city humbled, the legend of Palmyra continues to capture our imagination, a symbol of beauty and defiance in the desert. As the Roman Empire evolved, so did its beliefs. A new faith, born in the neighboring province of Judea, began to spread like wildfire along the trade routes and Roman roads. This was Christianity. Syria became one of its earliest and most important centers. The city of Antioch was a powerhouse of early Christian thought, and it was here, according to the Bible, that the followers of Jesus were first called Christians. When the Roman Empire split, Syria became part of the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine, Empire, with its capital at Constantinople. For centuries, it remained a profoundly Christian land, dotted with monasteries and churches, its scholars and theologians playing a central role in shaping the doctrines of the faith. In the 7th century, a new force emerged from the deserts of Arabia, propelled by a powerful new idea. This was the force of Islam. In the year 636, at the Battle of Yarmouk, Arab armies decisively defeated the Byzantine forces, bringing an end to 7 centuries of Roman rule in Syria. This was not just a military conquest, it was the beginning of a monumental shift in the region's culture, language, and identity. The local population, many of whom were tired of Byzantine rule and heavy taxes, offered little resistance. The transition was remarkably swift. Within a generation, Syria was transformed from a Christian province of a European empire into the heartland of a new dynamic Islamic civilization. The true golden age for Syria arrived with the Umayyad dynasty. In 661, the capital of the rapidly expanding Islamic Caliphate was moved from Arabia to Damascus. Suddenly, this ancient Syrian city was the political and cultural center of an empire that stretched from Spain to the borders of India. It was an astonishing reversal of fortune. Damascus became a magnificent metropolis, a beacon of learning and art. The Umayyads, drawing on the skills of Byzantine and Persian artisans, sponsored a new style of Islamic architecture. Their crowning achievement, the Great Mosque of Damascus, was built on the site of a Christian cathedral, which itself had been built on the site of a Roman temple to Jupiter. It stands today as a stunning symbol of the layers of history that define Syria. The Umayyad Caliphate brought a century of relative stability and immense prosperity. Arabic became the language of administration and culture, gradually replacing Greek and Aramaic in public life. Under their rule, science, medicine, and philosophy flourished, as scholars translated and built upon the knowledge of the Greeks and Persians. However, no empire lasts forever. In 750, the Umayyads were overthrown by a rival dynasty, the Abbasids. The Abbasids moved the capital of the caliphate from Damascus to a new city they built on the banks of the Tigris, Baghdad. Syria, once the center of the world, was relegated to the status of a provincial outpost. Its political importance waned, although it remained a significant center of trade and agriculture. As Abbasid power in Baghdad weakened over the centuries, Syria became a fractured and contested land. It was a prize fought over by a succession of regional powers. The Seljuk Turks, fierce warriors from Central Asia, swept in and took control. Then came a new and unexpected force from Europe, the Crusaders. For nearly 2 centuries, European knights established coastal strongholds and waged war to control the Holy Land, turning Syria into a battleground. This period saw the rise of one of the greatest heroes of the Islamic world, Salah al-Din, known in the West as Saladin. A Kurdish warrior of humble origins, he united the Muslim forces, drove out the Crusaders, and founded the Ayyubid dynasty, once again bringing a measure of unity and stability to Syria. After the heroic age of Saladin and the Ayyubids, a new and formidable power took control of Syria. They were the Mamluks, a dynasty of slave soldiers who seized power in Egypt and soon extended their rule over the Levant. For over 250 years, from the mid-13th to the early 16th century, the Mamluks governed Syria with a firm hand. They were the ones who finally expelled the last of the Crusaders from the coastal cities, and, even more significantly, stood as a bulwark against the devastating Mongol invasions from the east. The Mamluks were patrons of the arts and architecture, and their legacy can still be seen in the mosques, schools, and markets of Damascus and Aleppo, which flourished as major centers of international trade during this period. But history is a relentless tide, and in 1516, a new superpower rose to dominate the region. This was the Ottoman Empire, centered in modern-day Turkey. At the Battle of Marj Dabik, just north of Aleppo, the Ottoman Sultan Selim I shattered the Mamluk army. The age of the Mamluks was over, and Syria was absorbed into a vast, powerful, and enduring empire. For the next 400 years, Syria would be an Ottoman land. This long period is often viewed as a time of relative stagnation, but that simplifies a complex reality. The Ottomans were organized administrators who brought a long-lasting peace and stability that the region had not known for centuries. Under the Ottomans, Syria was not a single entity, but was divided into several provinces, or vilayets, most notably those centered on the great cities of Damascus and Aleppo. These cities served as vital administrative hubs and continued to thrive as major commercial centers. Aleppo, in particular, became one of the most important trading posts in the entire Ottoman Empire, a crucial stop on the Silk Road where merchants from Venice, Persia, and India met to exchange goods. Caravans laden with spices, silks, and other exotic wares filled in sprawling souks, creating a vibrant, cosmopolitan atmosphere. The Ottomans largely allowed local communities to manage their own affairs, so long as taxes were paid and order was maintained. This long era of Ottoman rule reinforced Syria's identity as part of the wider Islamic and Near Eastern world. While the ruling class was Turkish, the culture of the land remained distinctly Arab. The rhythms of life were dictated by the seasons of agriculture and the calls to prayer. The empire, however, began to weaken in the 18th and 19th centuries, earning the nickname the Sick Man of Europe. As its power faded, European nations, particularly France and Britain, began to exert increasing influence in the region, seeking to protect their commercial interests and strategic advantages. This growing European interference set the stage for the dramatic and painful breakup of the Ottoman Empire and the redrawing of the map of the Middle East. The First World War was the cataclysm that shattered the Old World. The Ottoman Empire, having sided with Germany, found itself on the losing side. As the empire crumbled, the Arab peoples within it saw a chance for independence. They rose up in what became known as the Great Arab Revolt, aided by the British, in the hope of creating a single, unified Arab state. A new Arab kingdom was declared in Damascus in 1920, with Faisal, a leader of the revolt, as its king. For a fleeting moment, the dream of a modern, independent Arab nation centered in Syria seemed within reach. It was a dream built on centuries of shared culture and a powerful desire for self-determination. However, the victorious European powers had other plans. In secret, during the war, Britain and France had already carved up the Ottoman territories for themselves in an agreement known as Sykes-Picot. They saw the Middle East not as a land of people deserving of freedom, but as a collection of territories to be controlled for their strategic value and resources. In 1920, French forces marched into Damascus, crushed the fledgling Arab kingdom, and forced King Faisal into exile. The dream of a united Arab state was extinguished. In its place, the League of Nations granted France a mandate to govern Syria, effectively turning it into a French colony under a different name. The French mandate was a period of profound frustration and resistance for the Syrian people. The French administrators pursued a classic divide and rule strategy. They carved the territory into several smaller statelets based on sectarian lines, an Alawite state, a Druze state, and so on, in an attempt to weaken any sense of a unified Syrian national identity. This policy sowed seeds of division and mistrust that would have tragic consequences many decades later. Furthermore, the French favored certain minority groups in administrative and military positions, creating resentment among the Sunni Arab majority. Throughout this period, Syrian nationalists organized protests, strikes, and armed uprisings, most notably the Great Syrian Revolt of 1925 to 1927, which was brutally suppressed. The struggle for freedom continued for 2 decades. The Second World War provided the opportunity the nationalists had been waiting for. With France itself under German occupation, its grip on its overseas empire weakened significantly. Britain, needing to secure the region against the Axis powers, supported the Syrian bid for sovereignty. In 1941, the Free French forces officially recognized Syria's independence, but they were reluctant to actually relinquish control. It took several more years of political maneuvering, international pressure, and popular unrest before the last French soldier finally departed. On April 17, 1946, Syria celebrated its full and unconditional independence, a date now commemorated as its National Day. the nation was finally its own master, but it was a nation born into a turbulent and uncertain world. The birth of the Syrian Republic was not an easy one. The newly independent nation was fragile, its political institutions weak, and its people divided by the legacy of French colonial policy. The first years of independence were marked by extreme political instability. The parliamentary system inherited from the French proved unable to cope with the country's deep social and economic problems. Governments rose and fell with dizzying speed. This chaos created a power vacuum, and like a law of nature, something had to fill it. That something was the military. In 1949, Syria experienced its first military coup, the first of many that would rock the nation over the next 2 decades. This era of instability saw Syria caught in the great currents of regional and global politics. The rise of Arab nationalism, championed by Egypt's charismatic leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, swept through the region. Many Syrians were captivated by the dream of pan-Arab unity, a modern echo of the old dream of a single Arab state. This powerful sentiment led to a momentous decision. In 1958, Syria and Egypt merged to form the United Arab Republic. For a time, it seemed as if the dream was being realized. The two nations shared a flag, an army, and a government, with Nasser as president. Damascus, once the capital of an empire, was now a provincial city in a state governed from Cairo. The union, however, was short-lived. It was a marriage of unequal partners. Syrians soon came to resent Egyptian dominance in the government and military. The political elite and business class in Damascus and Aleppo felt marginalized, and a military coup in Damascus in 1961 dissolved the union after just 3.5 years. Syria was once again on its own, but the experience had further destabilized its political landscape. The failure of the United Arab Republic discredited the old guard of politicians and created an opening for a more radical force that had been growing in the shadows, the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party. The Ba'ath Party's ideology was a potent mix of Arab nationalism, socialism, and a vision of a secular, unified Arab world. On March 8, 1963, a coalition of Ba'athist and Nasserist officers staged yet another coup, this time bringing the Ba'ath Party to power for good. This was a turning point in Syrian history. The party moved quickly to consolidate its control, nationalizing banks and industries and instituting land reforms. However, the Ba'ath Party itself was not a monolith. It was plagued by infighting between its radical military wing and its more moderate civilian founders. This internal power struggle simmered for years, culminating in a final decisive move. The stage was being set for one man to rise above the chaos and impose his own vision of order on the fractured nation. Out of the turbulent infighting of the Ba'ath Party, one figure emerged as the ultimate victor, Hafez al-Assad. A shrewd and calculating Air Force officer from the minority Alawite sect, Assad had been methodically building his power base within the military and the party for years. In November 1970, he launched what he called the corrective movement, a bloodless internal coup that purged his rivals and placed him in absolute control. This was not just another change of government. It was the beginning of a new era. Hafez al-Assad would go on to rule Syria with an iron fist for the next 3 decades, creating a system of power that would outlive him. Assad's first priority was stability. After 2 decades of coups and chaos, he offered Syria an end to the political turmoil, but at a very high price: freedom. He established a highly centralized and authoritarian state, with all power concentrated in his hands. He built a formidable security apparatus, a web of competing intelligence agencies known as the Mukhabarat, which monitored every aspect of society and ruthlessly crushed any sign of dissent. The Ba'ath Party became an instrument of state control, and a cult of personality was carefully constructed around Assad, whose portrait was displayed in every public square, office, and shop across the country. For the first time since independence, Syria had a strong, stable government, but it was a stability enforced by fear. On the regional stage, Assad positioned Syria as a key player in the complex chessboard of Middle Eastern politics. He was a staunch opponent of Israel, and under his command, Syria, along with Egypt, launched the 1973 October War in an attempt to reclaim the Golan Heights, a strategic plateau that Israel had captured in 1967. Though the war ended in a stalemate, it restored a sense of Arab pride. Assad also intervened decisively in the Lebanese civil war, sending in Syrian troops that would remain in Lebanon for nearly 3 decades, making Syria the dominant foreign power in that country. He skillfully played rival powers against each other, maintaining an alliance with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, while also engaging with the United States when it suited his interests. Domestically, Assad's rule was not without its challenges. The most serious threat came from the Muslim Brotherhood, a Sunni Islamist organization that rejected the secular, socialist nature of the Ba'athist state. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Brotherhood waged a violent insurgency against the government. The conflict reached its horrific climax in 1982 in the city of Hama. After an uprising there, Assad ordered the military to seal off the city and crush the rebellion without mercy. For weeks, the army shelled Hama, leveling entire districts and killing thousands of people. The Hama massacre was a brutal message to all Syrians. Any opposition to the regime would be met with overwhelming and catastrophic force. It ensured the regime's survival for another generation. In the year 2000, after 30 years of absolute rule, Hafez al-Assad died. The entire state apparatus he had built was designed to ensure a smooth transfer of power, not to a trusted general or a party veteran, but to his own son. His eldest son and heir apparent, Basil, had died in a car crash years earlier. So the mantle fell to his second son, Bashar al-Assad. A British-trained eye doctor with a quiet demeanor, Bashar seemed a world away from his stern, imposing father. For a brief moment, a wave of optimism swept through Syria and the world. Many hoped he would be a reformer, a modernizer who would open up the country's repressive political system and stagnant economy. This period of hope became known as the Damascus Spring. For a few months, intellectuals and citizens felt emboldened to gather in private forums to discuss political reform and human rights. But the spring was short-lived. The old guard, the powerful security chiefs and party officials who had served his father, saw this new openness as a threat to their power. The forums were shut down, and activists were arrested. It became clear that while the face of the regime had changed, its fundamental nature had not. Bashar al-Assad might have had some reformist instincts, but he was either unwilling or unable to challenge the powerful, deeply entrenched security state he had inherited. The system was designed for control, not for change. The turning point came in 2011. Inspired by successful uprisings against dictators in Tunisia and Egypt, a phenomenon that became known as the Arab Spring, protests erupted in the southern Syrian city of Daraa. They began small, sparked by the arrest and torture of a group of teenagers who had scrawled anti-regime graffiti on a wall. The protesters' initial demands were modest: the release of the boys, an end to corruption, and greater freedom. The regime, however, responded not with dialogue, but with the only tool it knew: overwhelming force. Security forces opened fire on unarmed demonstrators, killing several. This violence, instead of quelling the protests, ignited a firestorm of anger that spread across the entire country. What began as peaceful protests for reform quickly spiraled into a full-blown civil war. As the government's crackdown intensified, parts of the army began to defect, forming the Free Syrian Army to protect protesters and fight back. The conflict became increasingly complex and brutal. It was no longer just a struggle between the government and a unified opposition. The chaos created a vacuum that was filled by extremist groups with their own agendas, most notoriously the Islamic State, which carved out a caliphate in eastern Syria and western Iraq. The war also became a global proxy conflict, with foreign powers intervening on all sides. Iran and Russia provided crucial military and financial support to the Assad government, while Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United States supported various rebel factions. The nation had shattered. As we stand here today, in 2026, the landscape of Syria is one of immense tragedy and profound uncertainty. The full-scale, nationwide violence of the civil war has subsided. The government of Bashar al-Assad, with the decisive help of its Russian and Iranian allies, has managed to regain control over the most populous parts of the country, including the major cities of Damascus, Aleppo, and Homs. The front lines have largely frozen, and the deafening sound of artillery barrages and airstrikes is no longer a daily reality for millions. But this is not peace. It is the quiet of exhaustion, the stillness of a shattered nation. Syria remains a deeply divided country, broken into several zones of control. The northwest, around Idlib province, is the last major stronghold of anti-government rebel and jihadist groups, supported by neighboring Turkey. The northeast is governed by Syrian Kurdish forces, who were instrumental in the fight against ISIS and are now backed by a small contingent of American troops. The rest of the country is under government authority. This fragmentation means that Syria exists more as a geographical expression than as a unified, functioning state. The dream of a single sovereign nation that was born in 1946 seems more distant than ever before. The human and economic cost of the conflict is almost beyond comprehension. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. More than half of the country's pre-war population has been forced to flee their homes. Millions are refugees in neighboring countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, while millions more are internally displaced within Syria itself. Entire cities lie in ruins, their infrastructure destroyed. The economy is in a state of total collapse, crippled by a decade of war, international sanctions, rampant corruption, and the financial crisis in neighboring Lebanon. For the average Syrian, daily life is a relentless struggle for survival, defined by poverty, power cuts, and shortages of food and medicine. And yet, through all the destruction, the spirit of Syria endures. This is, after all, a land that has seen empires rise and fall for 5,000 years. It has been destroyed and rebuilt countless times. Its history is a testament to an incredible resilience, a capacity to survive, adapt, and preserve its identity against all odds. The journey ahead is long and unimaginably difficult. Rebuilding the cities of stone and concrete will be a monumental task, but the even greater challenge will be to rebuild trust, to heal the deep wounds of the war, and to stitch the nation's fractured social fabric back together. Syria's story is a profound chapter in the epic of human civilization, a story that is